But the main plot of this book is Carrot solving a series of murders. They investigate like this clown guild and the assassins guild, and
only Terry Pratchett could write a clown funeral.
I know, the clown funeral is so charming.
It's so good.
All of his scenes, basically every single scene it has some charm to it.
It's fantastic. Hello and welcome to Your Favorite Book. I'm Mallory.
I'm Tanner.
We're siblings.
And we like reading books.
This week we will be talking about Men at Arms by Terry Pratchett.
Men's Arms.
Men's Arms, they're at it.
Over here. We don't have the actual book.
It is the second book in the Discworld series.
Well, it's the second book in the Guards series.
Subgenre of the Discworld series. It follows Guards.
It's a part of the Discworld series.
Which, if you know anything about that, you understand why I said the wrong thing. Because it's a whole conglomeration of great books.
Terry Pratchett is one of my favorite authors. Guards is one of my top 5 favorite books. It's very important to my childhood and to my adulthood.
Yay.
I've read it maybe 5 or 6 times. This is my second time reading Men at Arms. I'm trying to read all of Terry Pratchett's Discworld books. He's like my favorite author.
Yeah.
His books are the perfect length for me, where you can get like a big story with lots of characters, a fun plot, good themes.
Good pacing,
all that stuff. Brilliant writing. And it's very rereadable.
Genuine laugh out loud moments.
Absolutely.
Like a lot.
Like I've never laughed this hard at an author before. At an author's writing before. I've laughed plenty at authors, yes. But we're not going to make a list of those people, even though that would be a fun tier list.
That's for your favorite book after dark. Comment if you want that.
Where we get a trash on our least favorite authors.
You could just watch the Maze Runner.
Yeah, you can watch our Maze Runner. No, he's like top of the list.
Or our Scorched Trials episode. It'll be the same
Woo.
thing. Anyway.
Terry Pratchett he's a prolific author, He's written maybe 40 books in the Discworld. If you don't know, the Discworld is his own universe. It's a very goofy place, but with very lovable characters. You don't have to read each of the books in order to understand what's going on. You can pick and choose kind of where you want. There's a lot of lists out there where people say, like, this is the place to start. Guards is just where I started, so that's where we're starting with that, and then we're going to expand in the future. But Men at Arms is the sequel to Guards, and Guards is about the Night Watch, which is basically the police in Ankh-Morpork, this gigantic city, this horribly disgusting place that's run by a man named the Patrician, Lord Vetinari. And it's about the Captain Vimes, who's captain of the Night Watch. And how he and his group of lovable misfits solve crimes within the city. That's basically the pitch of the Guards series.
Yeah.
In the first book, Captain Vimes, Carrot, Lance Constable Carrot, Corporal Nobbs, and Sergeant Colon, along with some other characters, defeat a dragon. And we've already reviewed that book if you want to watch that.
It's a good episode.
We're going to spoil things from that book probably. And there's some nice surprises that we didn't want to give away. So if you want to read that first and then listen to that episode before you listen to this one, please go ahead and do that. But this book is more about Captain Vimes passing on the torch to Corporal Lance Constable Carrot. I'm trying to remember all their titles.
It's better than I can do. I just call them all Carrot and Vimes.
Yeah, let's just call them that. It's easier. So what is this book about?
So this book follows a couple different perspectives. It's omniscient third person.
Very highbrow.
Yeah, I didn't know what that was until we started this podcast and you told me what it was.
But now you know.
Yeah, now I know. So it follows a whole bunch of different characters. Captain Vimes has a great arc where he's heading into retirement from the Night Watch as he's going to be married to the richest woman in Ankh-Morpork. Whatever. And then we follow Carrot as he's trying to solve a murder along with a troll and a dwarf who are tasked to work together. They're like, in my mind, it's like their beat cop routine that they gotta be a beat cop before they can graduate.
Like, but in a fantasy world.
And this...
Don't forget Angua.
Yes, Angua, who is a diversity hire, along with the other two, dwarf and troll, she's a woman. And she's a werewolf, so it's a really double hitter on the diversity hire.
Yeah, it is. So that's one of the first things that they introduce in this book, and Terry Pratchett likes to tackle like socioeconomic issues in his stories, and fantasy is a great way to use like metaphors for diversity hires, racism, different forms of government, capitalism, stuff like that. And that's part of why I love Terry Pratchett so much, is that he so brilliantly like brings up these stupid issues that people have in the real world with his characters to make them look really foolish. Like in the first book, for example, everyone in Ankh-Morpork wants to bring back a king because they think the patrician is oppressing them. And Vimes is the only one who's like, a monarchy won't solve our problems. And it's a great commentary on that sort of stuff in our real life, of how silly it is that people in power will use reasons for why they're oppressed to distract them from the real issues.
Yeah.
And to say, if you elect us as a monarchy, then we'll solve all your problems. And it's like, no, that's not the truth. They're just lying to you.
Yep.
This second book tackles the issue of racism and diversity hires, which is like, how do you... That's such a big topic, right?
Yeah.
As an author, for me, that would be so intimidating.
It would be. And I mean, who would think to do that with dwarves, trolls, and werewolves?
I know.
But I mean, it works, and it makes you compassionate for werewolves and dwarves and trolls, and then you can go,
there's a comparison here to my real life. It's actually interesting, at the time of recording this podcast, there are a lot of discussions about like diversity hires and like, well, you should just hire the best person for the job and all that stuff. When, and we won't get into that too much, but this book, it's a really good time to read right now in the year 2024. If you want to hear perspectives as to why diversity hires are so important and they make our world a better, safer, and a more productive place.
Yeah.
It's an interesting place for this book to start, where even Carrot, the main character, who's supposed to be like not an insert character for Terry Pratchett, but I think the person that Terry Pratchett wants to be, the type of person that Terry Pratchett wants to be in power. Someone who's good and honest, very charismatic. If we're to use Shannon Hale magic system comparison, Carrot has the power of people speaking.
Yeah, but in a good way, not an evil way.
Yeah. And so Carrot, even he is like not hesitant or judgmental about the Watch hiring dwarves and trolls and women. He doesn't know that Angu's a werewolf, which is great.
He thinks she's a diversity hire purely because she's a woman, and it's because she's a werewolf. And I just love that. It was so silly.
It was a great reveal when Carrot's
and he's like,
oh my goodness.
By golly, I think I'm in love with a werewolf.
Yeah, it's great. There's a nice little love interest between those two. It's not a great romance.
It's not anything crazy, but
I mean, you'd be a better judge of that than me. It was
charming. I thought it was sweet and cute, but it wasn't anything to write home about.
Yeah, it kind of felt like that's just the sort of thing that you would do in this story.
Yeah.
Carrot finds love. Anyway, but even Carrot, he finds out where Angua is staying, and he's like, you're staying here with vampires and the undead? Those kind of people? Like, even Carrot, who's supposed to be, like...
righteous and virtuous.
Yeah. Even he's bigoted.
Yeah.
Which is really brave to do for your story.
Yeah, and that's very vulnerable as an author to represent this fantastic character who, all throughout the book, the whole entire village of Ankh-Morpork is like, hey, Carrot's here! Carrot's home!
Everybody loves Carrot.
Everybody loves Carrot. And for him to even be like, oh, I'm a little bit speciesist, and I didn't even realize it. What an important lesson to learn.
Yeah.
And to teach yourself to look at your biases. And
because, it
is vulnerable, but you need to do it.
Right. It is. And it's difficult to confront those things, those internalized, not phobias, but internalized judgments or preconceived notions about certain groups of people that you didn't know you had.
Yeah.
And it can be embarrassing if you, like, put your foot in your mouth and you say something to somebody who's like, oh, well, that's not how I feel. I come from a community like this, a minority community.
Yeah.
And what you're saying is hurting me and people like me. So I love that he's willing to write his main characters as being flawed in that way.
It's so much more realistic, and it's so much more comforting to me to read. To be like, aw, and you're not afraid of that. like, even Carrot, when he does address that kind of stuff, he's like, oh, wow. Well, now I know. I was wrong, which is nice.
Yeah, it is nice. Yeah, the main plot of this book is... I really love this book, but I do have some problems with it from a story structure point of view, which we'll get into. But the main plot of this book is Carrot solving a series of murders. And we follow Carrot and Angua and Sergeant Colon and Nobby, of course, as they investigate like this clown guild and the assassins guild and...
Only Terry Pratchett could write a clown funeral.
I know. The clown funeral is so charming.
It's so good.
All of his scenes, basically every single scene it has some charm to it.
It's fantastic.
This book is a lot more serious in tone than Guards for me.
Yeah.
Guards felt so cartoonish, but I remember every single scene from that book.
Yeah. I mean, there's a big difference between a dragon ransacking villages versus, there's a third person who's been murdered in the middle of the night.
Yeah.
Which he still balances it great. His tone is still very lighthearted, and it's still appropriate and touching, I guess.
Yeah. I think because it is lighthearted, and this is something that you mentioned before the podcast, some of the deaths and the more dramatic scenes in this book don't have quite as much weight.
Yeah, it kind of, to me, feels a little bit like, if you were to read the more YA fantasy that I would read, there would be a lot of high funnies and low lows, and it would be more like this. And this book kind of feels like it's just funny and then dips a little bit when it becomes more serious, and there's just not much of a contrast between the two. At least that's kind of how I felt when I was reading it.
Yeah.
And I mean, it works.
Yeah, it does work. I think I liked Guards more, personally. I don't know. My second time reading this book, it didn't click with me quite as well.
Yeah.
It didn't feel as funny, and maybe that's because some of the character dynamics change. Like Carrot, he becomes a lot wiser.
Yeah.
In the first book, he's a fish out of water, and it's hilarious when he arrests the head of the Thieves Guild. But in the beginning of this book, he's grown up a lot.
Yeah.
He's really loving Ankh-Morpork. He explores the city. He loves to go to museums. Everyone knows him. He knows all the rules, and he also knows things like, well, I shouldn't take the old rule book of Ankh-Morpork so seriously. Like, the patrician, obviously, he believes in organized crime, so, assassinations are legal in the city, but you have to do it, at a certain quota. You have to plan for that stuff.
Yeah.
And Carrot's like, yeah, it's weird, but the city works that way. And he even mentions that to Angua at the beginning of the story. Angua's like, how is this stuff working? She's new to Ankh-Morpork, and Carrot says, well, the thing is that it all works.
Yeah.
Right? So he agrees with the way that the patrician governs his city.
There's also an interesting thing that I caught in this book. I say that like it was hard to catch. It wasn't. It was blatantly written in the text. But when they're talking about this first murder that they find, they're like, no one's ever been murdered here. People are only either assassinated or suicide.
Yeah.
The culture around Ankh-Morpork is that murder doesn't happen and it doesn't exist. And they're like, you can only die of suicide by walking in a dark alley.
Yeah. It's
no one could get murdered. I just thought that was so silly.
Yeah, it is. And I love stuff like that for his world because it's good world building.
It adds texture to the world building.
Definitely. And it makes Ankh-Morpork feel unique.
Yeah, it does.
In that way. Captain Vimes does not play a large role in this book. He's he's the secondary protagonist in Guards. I would say he shares that position with Carrot, maybe.
Yeah.
I don't know. Now that I say it, maybe he is the primary protagonist in the first book, and Carrot's the secondary protagonist in this one. They kind of
swap.
They totally swap. We really only get a few chapters from Vimes' perspective.
But boy, did I love every single one of those chapters.
I did too.
I love Vimes.
So do I, and I think I wanted more of him. I liked that dynamic between he and Carrot in the first book, and it's kind of absent in this one.
Yeah.
Carrot really does change quite a bit, and maybe that's why I don't really...
Yeah,
it doesn't really fit for me.
Do you happen to know... I think maybe I just didn't pick it up, but how much time is between Guards, and Men-at-Arms?
I don't know.
Because I didn't ever pick that up.
Within
but it's quite a while, right?
That's what it feels like to me.
Yeah.
But I don't know, because at the end of the first book, Captain Vimes is going to marry, what's her name?
Ramkin.
Lady Ramkin, thank you. Mm-hmm. And then in the second book is basically,
like,
the wedding doesn't happen
away.
until the end.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe the events between books 1 and 2 are not that long.
It just seems like a very dramatic shift, characterization-wise.
Yeah, that's what it felt like to me too. And I guess I'm okay with that.
Mm-hmm.
But it's just different.
Yeah.
It's just a different feeling. To me, it felt like this book wasn't as well put together as Guards. It really felt like just a typical sequel where the Night Guard is going to solve a murder mystery while at the same time resolving race relation tensions between the dwarves and the trolls.
Yeah.
And then there's this third thing where it's like Captain Vimes marrying Lady Ramkin and struggling with that and getting to know like the higher members of society.
Yeah.
It's like all those pieces were kind of there to put together a more coherent narrative with a singular message, but it didn't quite come together for me.
Yeah, I kind of felt the same way while I was reading it. It just felt a little bit disconnected between the protagonist's goals and the antagonist's goals. Mm-hmm. There wasn't enough overlap to me, which sounds silly because there should be a lot of overlap between antagonist goals and protagonist goals.
Right.
I don't know.
In the first book, we get a lot from the villain's perspectives. Omniscient third person means that you can go from like paragraph to paragraph and jump from characters' heads. And I love that style of writing, personally, especially from Terry Pratchett. It's probably because I grew up with Terry Pratchett stuff. But in the first book, we learn a lot about, and this is spoilers for the first book again, Lupine Wants and the elucidated brethren, who are the bad guys in the first book. They're trying to bring a dragon back, and they're trying to convince the people that a king will come to slay the dragon, and then a king will solve all your problems. And Captain Vimes feels like the only character who is like, are you people stupid? Like, a king will not solve all your problems. And it feels like it's ideologically Vimes is pitted against the goals of the antagonist.
Yeah, it makes it very cohesive, especially when you get to the end and it all culminates together in the same scene at the end.
Yeah. You even get like really poignant scenes where Pratchett is trying to really establish just how futile it is for people to fight against the dragon. When Sergeant Colon is like, everyone, we need to unite against the dragon. We can fight and win. And then the dragon comes and eats some people. And it's like, wow, it's so powerful for him to deliver that message of like, there's really nothing we can do against these powerful things.
Futile.
Yeah, individually we can't do anything against these things that we can't change that are suppressing us.
Yeah.
Like, that's obviously something that fascinates him. It's something that fascinates me.
Me too.
And using dragons as a metaphor to tell that story is really powerful. You don't notice it as a kid, but it's something you notice as an adult. In the second book, the antagonist is a character named Edward Death. And I wish we had an actual physical copy of the book to see how it was spelled.
It's spelled lowercase d apostrophe capital EATH.
Lowercase d for his last. Oh, okay, yeah.
It doesn't really matter, but it is.
No, that makes sense. And it's funny because he's an assassin.
Yeah, and his last name is Death.
Yeah, haha.
I think that's silly.
Yeah, and we get a chapter from his perspective in the beginning of the book. And he's trying to convince the Assassin's Guild and other members of descendants of royalty that we should bring a king back. So it's similar to the first one. And it's just like a different character, different character, but same goals as like Lupine Wants. But we don't get very much information from Edward Death throughout the book the same way we do in the first one. And even though Edward Death is like working together with people from upper society, we don't see Vimes really fighting against those people. And the majority of the narrative is really about Carrot and the other members of the Night Guard solving this murder and trying to solve race relations between the dwarves and the trolls. So it feels like you kind of get two different stories and they don't mesh together for me.
It's kind of awkward. There's a scene, and correct me if I'm remembering this wrong.
I will.
But there's a scene when Captain Vimes is like at this like high societal banquet to celebrate his upcoming marriage, right?
His nuptials.
Yeah, and he does not want to be there. He hates it. He doesn't like all these rich people. And the rich people are super, super, super mean about the poorer classes.
They're racist.
Especially the dwarves and the trolls.
Yeah.
And Vimes doesn't want to be there. And in an act of defiance, he purposefully embarrasses Ramkin.
Mm-hmm.
It reminds me of the dish, the ramekin. So I always say ramekin instead of ramkin. Sorry.
Maybe
anyway.
that's what it was inspired by.
Yeah. But he gets super drunk and then purposefully pushes those opinions and those racist thoughts to the edge as far as they can go. And
to get those rich people to make a fool of themselves, to say something really racist about dwarves or trolls.
Mm-hmm. Which was interesting, but I was like, oh...
Vimes.
That's kind of sad to me. I get what he was trying to say and trying to go for there, but there wasn't, in my opinion, there wasn't a good ending or a good, ha ha ha, you were wrong and you're racist and I'm right because I'm not racist.
Yeah.
I wanted a better finisher on that scene.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I wanted a resolution for that type of stuff too, because the royal people being racist and not wanting immigrants to come into their city and ruin things is obviously a very important message for this book.
Yeah.
But it doesn't really feel like he says anything very definitive about that. Mm-hmm. Like I said, it feels like one of those things that the story introduces but doesn't really resolve.
Yeah.
And it happens a couple times. There's another moment when Carrot, he's showing Angua to her rooms and he's like, you're staying with vampires and the undead? And to me, it felt like even that didn't quite get resolved. Like, it said, the story was saying Carrot's also a bigot, even though he's a good person. And I liked that vulnerability. Mm-hmm. I liked that flaw with him.
Yeah.
But it also didn't feel like there was a resolution there either. Mm-hmm. Like, there should have been more conflict between he and Angua. Angua should have been like, Carrot, people love you and they admire you, but you only really care about the
people
dwarves.
People who are like you.
Yeah, and humans. Like, you need to treat people like me, werewolves and vampires and the undead the same way, and look how they're oppressed. That was never really resolved in the story.
Yeah, I agree, and that causes a big disconnect.
Yeah, it does. Angua was just kind of like, wow, look at Carrot. He's so charismatic and he's helping all these people, and that stuff's great, but can we address this flaw in his character?
Yeah.
Please?
Yeah, I mean, he does fall in love with her at the end, but that doesn't resolve it.
No, it felt like it wasn't addressed.
Yeah, especially if you are blatantly saying he's bigoted, which he is blatantly saying, you need to blatantly prove that wrong then.
Yeah.
You can't subtly do it. 'Cause, like, back off all of a sudden and be like, oh, but he likes a werewolf, so he can't be racist.
Yeah. But Angua is the perfect character to do that for him.
Exactly.
To help him see his flaws and to help him realize something bigger about himself.
Yeah,
like
for
if you say that you're a people of the city, Carrot, that includes
all of the people.
All of the people. Mm-hmm. All of the suppressed minority groups.
For liberty and justice for all.
Yeah. So
sorry.
No, it's okay. It feels like those things were introduced and addressed with the dwarves and the trolls fighting each other. Like trolls are basically rocks and dwarves mine for rocks, so they are like natural enemies. It's a comedic thing. And Carrot he acts like as an arbiter between those two groups, and all that stuff is resolved well, I thought.
Yeah, I do too.
And it was resolved through Cuddy and Detritus. But there's stuff on the edges that feel like weren't really, I don't know.
Polished or finished.
Or tied in together.
Yeah.
Like, you mentioned Captain Vimes at that dinner table when he's talking with the royalty. And I imagine Edward de Eth would be speaking with those same people in a previous scene, not at this same dinner scene with Captain Vimes and Lady Ramkin. And I wanted something like Edward de Eth and the royalty, like exacerbating the race war between the dwarves and the trolls. And then Captain Vimes, realizing, hey, because even Captain Vimes is bigoted towards dwarves and trolls.
Yeah.
And in that dinner scene, I think Pratchett is trying to show us how Captain Vimes is like maybe confronting his own internalized racism or speciesism.
Yeah.
And deciding to grow outside of that. Like, there wasn't really much growth for him there.
And also he was just doing, like, he was drunk the whole time. There wasn't even, like, a completely sober, conscious choice in that, too.
And even Lady Ramkin, after that dinner scene, she's disappointed with him, obviously. and asking him, like, why are you behaving in this way? Like, actually, it's kind of a similar problem between Carrot and Angua, right? Mm-hmm. Like, there should be some more consequences for both Vimes and Carrot making these mistakes in front of their loved ones, right? And Lady Ramkin tells Vimes, like, I've heard you say some of those things about dwarves and trolls.
Yeah.
And Vimes says, well, that's different because I work with them, so I can say that.
Exactly.
And it's like, I feel like we need we need to dig into this a bit more.
Yeah, I also want, for a book about diversity hires, his female characters aren't written very well.
No, not really.
Like, I wanted
not
more, more personality and more choice and more confrontation like that. Like, for Ramkin to be like, I'm going to marry you and I do not want to be attached to someone who's racist.
Yeah.
Fix yourself.
Or at least tell us that Lady Ramkin is racist,
too.
Yeah,
the same thing. Yeah. Let's fix this together. Wow.
Yeah. I don't know. It's like, maybe it's a scope problem.
Yeah.
Maybe you should just let go of the whole of Captain Vimes integrating with Royal Society and struggling with giving up being a watchman. Him being not just a little bit, him being racist towards dwarves and trolls.
Yeah.
And Lady Ramkin being doicid. Like, cut that stuff out. Simplify. Just focus on the story that you wanted to tell, which to me felt like how to resolve racism between... Not even racism between dwarves and trolls, but like, how do you, what is he trying to say with this story, Because
I don't know. It's too muddled.
It feels like those things that we've addressed, like Carrot being a bigot and Vimes being a bigot, should have been taken out so that he could focus on things like, he wants to tell a story about trolls and dwarves learning how to get along.
Yeah.
That's what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
Because that's most of this book, right? It's mostly about these murders. The trolls are blaming the dwarves for the murders and vice versa. And then things just get worse and worse and worse.
Yeah.
And then Carrot is the person who stands up and says, no.
Let's sort this out. Yeah, I think that would be more powerful. And honestly, it would get the same things across without muddling it with all of this extra frilly stuff that doesn't quite seem to connect in the end. Yeah. In my opinion.
I agree. Because the stuff with the diversity hires, he does say, like, Carrot says this a few times throughout the book, like, the word policeman, it comes from the word polis, which means city. So, a man of the city, that's what a policeman should be. So, Terry Pratchett is advocating for community policing. So, like, at least in America, the way that policing works is that the people who are in charge of supporting the law in your area are usually not from that place. And if they do anything wrong, then they're just shipped to another district. Like, there's no accountability, there's no justice. I think Terry Pratchett is trying to say that Carrot is the ideal lawman because he comes from Ankh-Morpork.
And he cares about Ankh-Morpork.
He loves Ankh-Morpork, right? He loves the city, he wants to protect it, he wants to take care of it. And that's how policing should work. Yeah. And the policemen should represent the population of the city. Yeah. Like, there should be a dwarf, there should be a troll, because they have
this
unique
much
perspectives.
Percent of the population, too. Like, they take up a good portion of Ankh-Morpork.
Yeah. Well, regardless of how small that percentage. Yeah. Without representation within, like, basically every industry. Like, I'm even talking about the entertainment industry. There is, like, a socioeconomic ripple effect for how those minority groups are represented. Yeah. And they're treated unfairly because their voices aren't heard. And that's why people in the status quo, people like right-wing grifters, say things like, there's lesbians in this movie, there's black people in this movie, get them out, because they're already
represented.
They're represented.
By 200% that they need to be.
Yes, they're already a member of the status quo. So then they think when these minority groups are asking for representation, they're like, you're just trying to take away my things. When it's not true. No. And people in power will stoke those animosities to remain in power. Yes. And they'll get poor white people, I'm getting on a soapbox here, but they'll get poor white people to think that minority groups are taking away their jobs, their health care and stuff to distract them from the real problems.
Which is, the people in power suck!
It's true.
And the systems that we continue to uphold continue to encourage that exploitation.
Yes, and not only do they exploit minority groups, but they also exploit poor majority groups. And unfortunately, the people in power they have the power of people speaking, and they're really good at disseminating propaganda.
Yeah.
So that's why I love Terry Pratchett, is that I think that's his intention with this book. And it does come across.
It does. Like, it's just a little bit too muddy.
Yeah. And maybe, I don't know how you solve that problem. I'd have to spend more time to think about it.
Yeah.
I think the key would be to simplify it and to say, what do you want to say about this book? I want to say diversity hires are important. I want to talk about, like, community policing. Okay. Let's take out the Vime stuff.
Yeah.
Let's simplify it.
Yeah.
Let's focus on the dwarves and the trolls.
And Carrot and Angua.
Yeah. And then you can do their romance. Like, they could fall in love in this book. Carrot can find out she's a werewolf. And then in the second book, you start them off with conflict.
Yes, exactly.
And then it's like, Carrot has Carrot's a good person because he cares about the dwarves, cares about the trolls. He sees them as real people. At the end of the second book, you reveal that Angua is a werewolf. And he's like, oh no, I have this... I didn't know that I had these preconceived notions about werewolves and the undead and vampires and these other groups of people. And then that's a good cliffhanger for book 3.
It is. And it can show you where it needs to go from, oh, I thought I loved you, to also, this is who I am. Nothing has changed.
Right.
You're just biased. Ooh, that'd be so delicious.
Yeah.
That'd be fantastic.
Like, give each of these issues their own room to breathe in these books because, geez, like, how do you... It's a big issue to begin with, just talking about, like, racism and diversity hires. Like, you can handle the individual characters, like Vimes and Carrot, being bigots in future books.
Yeah.
I think you could have integrated Vimes being a bigot in this book a bit better.
I think so, too.
He never really resolves his internalized racism.
No, he doesn't.
Like, maybe make him more... Like, he has to work with the Watch more.
Yeah.
And he sees, like, the importance of, like, having Lance Constable Cuddy and Lance Constable Detritus don't salute in the Watch, right?
Yeah.
Because it almost feels like, I don't know, that resolution happens too quickly, and the resolution isn't very satisfying.
I think it's also kind of feels like he just gets away with being able to be racist, because then he retires, and then after he retires, spoiler alert, he gets put back into being in charge of the Watch. Like, there's no...
He becomes the commander. He gets promoted.
Yeah, there's no repercussions. It's just the same old Vimes with the same old opinions, but now he has a lot of people working underneath him that he thinks probably should be underneath him.
Yeah.
That's not fixing anything!
No. It's like the book doesn't quite push those themes far enough, I think.
I agree.
It doesn't give these
it's all made up in fantasy anyway. Why not push it more?
Yeah. I think if you're gonna make, like, your main characters bigots, like Carrot and Vimes, then they need to suffer consequences for that, and they need to grow.
Yeah.
And that's the problem, is those things aren't present.
Yeah, it isn't. Like, so someone is trying to kill Vimes. What if during that scene... In this book.
Edward de Eth is trying to kill Captain Vimes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What if he finds out that Edward de Eth is the one who's trying to kill him, and the only person who can save him is a dwarf or a troll or a werewolf?
Yeah.
And he has to put his own issues aside and go, oh my gosh, they are just as fantastic as me.
Yeah.
I was in the wrong for thinking that I was ever better than them. And I am so humble and grateful for their unique abilities that were able to get me out of this situation. And the person who wanted to kill me was the guy I thought who was cool the whole time.
That would be great.
Something like that.
And you have Carrot in this story at the very beginning say, a policeman is a man of the city. So already he doesn't have much of an arc of, like, believing that, we need diversity hires. So who's the main character in this book? It probably should be Vimes, where he struggles with understanding that concept.
Yeah.
Where he believes, no, a policeman is someone who's better than other people, who understands righteousness and justice. Make him really snobbish about that stuff.
Yeah.
And then he can meet the royals and see how, I hate them for their snobbishness, but I'm the same way.
And I have that in myself.
That would be really interesting. And then you can, like, you don't have to worry about Carrot being a bigot. You just keep him as the same idyllic character. And that's fine.
Yeah.
He doesn't need much of an arc if he's just a secondary character. And Carrot can be the one who teaches Vimes, a policeman is a man of the city. That includes everyone in the city.
Yeah.
That's why Detritus and Cuddy are important, because without them, we would not have been able to solve this race riot.
Exactly.
And then Captain Vimes realizes, oh, I need to grow from my internalized racism, right? And stuff like that.
Yeah.
That would have been so much more satisfying. Can we rewrite this book?
Yes, please.
And I love this book.
It was great.
I know we're getting negative on it.
I was entertained. It's so, like, the perfect word to describe it to me is charming.
Yeah.
It's just lovely.
Yeah, I think so too. And we'll talk about that stuff definitely. It's just sad when it's tainted by, like, mishandling these characters.
Yeah.
And mishandling the theme. Yeah, it's kind of a disappointing book for me.
Yeah.
Because I have such high expectations. I'm very curious about the process of writing this book.
Yeah.
Like, did he have enough time?
Yeah, that would be interesting to me too, because it just kind of feels a little bit disconnected, and I just wonder if maybe a couple more passes through would have maybe eased some of the wrinkles, or if maybe this is just what he intended and as far as he wanted to go with it. I don't know.
Yeah. I don't know either, but I'm very curious because Guards is like
it's
so
fantastic.
Perfect for me.
Yeah.
Yeah, I do feel like maybe he was figuring this book out as he wrote it.
Yeah.
Where it's like, oh, I'm going to make Carrot bigot. And then, I'm not going to really resolve that, but there is a love story, so I'll resolve that because there's so many other big things that I'm worrying about.
Yeah. It's a big book.
It is a big book, and the murder mystery is complex and unfortunately not that interesting.
Yeah.
So it makes it kind of boring. When if you could make this book shorter and more interesting. If you made, like, Captain Vimes the main character again, and you just focused on his character arc dealing with these diversity hires.
Yeah.
And someone who's trying to murder him is also stoking hatred between these two groups. And Captain Vimes, his eyes are opened as he sees how, like, oh, the systems that have been in place for so long, royalty, still exist today. And they still try to encourage people to be distracted by, like, immigrants moving in instead of seeing, like, the actual problems with the world that they live in.
Yeah.
That would have been so much more satisfying.
I agree.
It's just kind of subpar for a Terry Pratchett book for me.
Yeah, it was like the perfect pitch, and then you just didn't quite knock it out of the park.
Boring! No, that's a good metaphor.
Thank you.
Did you say that because your husband's at a Dodgers game? Yeah. So should we talk about the good stuff?
Yeah!
What is this story actually about? We talked about, like, what isn't in the story, but what actually happens in this book. And I don't think it would be interesting to go through step by step how the murder mystery happens.
No, read it. It's good.
It's good. It's good. Enjoyable.
And part of why it's so enjoyable is because the characters are so fun and so distinct.
Yeah, that's what he's best at.
I love the characters in this book. I love Captain Detritus Don't Salute and Cuddy. Is that the other guy?
They're both constables.
So fun constables. See, I said it wrong. So, whatever. But these two beat cops, basically.
They're so adorable.
It's a dwarf and
They're
a troll.
They're the ultimate ship.
They are so silly and goofy, and they both kind of hate each other, and it's just such a fun glimpse into the dwarf-troll dynamic.
Yep.
They're just so stupid. Detritus Don't Salute is called Detritus Don't Salute because when he salutes, he knocks himself out. He just goes, thunk!
He's a gigantic dumb troll.
It's so funny to me. Like, what a fun and quirky, silly thing to give your character. He's so great at giving them unique qualities that I would never think of in a million years.
Yeah. They're so much fun, and they are the heart of this story. Like, in the first book, the secondary characters are Sergeant Colon and Nobby, and they take a backseat in this book, and they're replaced by Cuddy and Detritus, and they represent the race war between the dwarves and the trolls that's going on in Ankh-Morpork. And Kara is the person who leads the charge to always bring peace between both groups. But that race war is not resolved until the end of the story, and not until Cuddy and Detritus resolve their own interpersonal issues. And the journey they go on is my favorite part of the book.
Me too.
And it does take up the bulk of the story. They go on their own little adventure in the middle of the book where they're chasing after the murderer, and they go underneath the city of Ankh-Morpork to follow this guy who just murdered a dwarf. And it's really interesting, like visually, the setting of like Ankh-Morpork is built on top of other cities, and so there's layers and layers of like this disgusting, grimy places. It was really cool in my mind's eye, and he doesn't do like a lot of descriptions, and kind of leaves it up to your imagination.
He goes more for the vibe,
which I like.
I do too.
I always love the setting of an underground city for some reason, but Lance Constable Detritus, don't salute, saves Constable Cuddy's life. When the murderer, he has this strange weapon, this powerful thing. It's a nice little world building mystery.
Yeah.
It's probably the most interesting part of the mystery, unfortunately. Which is a fantasy gun. This genius has invented a gun.
Yeah.
And Detritus steps in the way of Cuddy to save his life. And there's like 6 bullet holes in Detritus's armor.
Yeah.
And so really that's where these two like learn to become better friends.
And Cuddy teaches Detritus how to count.
Yep, which is so much fun.
Very cute. He's like, how much is this? 2. How much is this? 2 2s.
2 and 2 more.
2 and 2 more. How much is this? 4 2s.
Yeah.
So good.
We listened to the audiobook. We haven't mentioned this.
Yeah.
I really love the reader.
I do too.
His accents kind of slip a little bit.
Yeah,
but they're
quite
really
a bit,
fun.
But I don't really mind because he's having
either.
a fun time, and I followed. So
yeah, and Detritus has this thick Scottish accent.
Yeah,
which is really fun.
I was reading through some comments on the audiobook, and there were so many cute, loving comments of like just people who love Terry Pratchett, and apparently the narrator that we listened to, his name is Nigel. Something that starts with a P, but his audiobooks are harder to find. They've released newer ones since then, and his is like the original first audiobook, from what I understood. I could be wrong. But all the comments were like, oh man, it just feels so comforting to fall back into my favorite Terry Pratchett book.
Yeah.
And I even saw someone who said they started with Men at Arms, and that was the first book they read in the Discworld series.
Interesting.
Which I thought was interesting.
Yeah, and I think you could read this book for your first Discworld book, and it'd be perfectly
totally
enjoyable.
Get it. Yeah.
It's just not quite as good as Guards, in my opinion.
I agree.
Yeah, Lance Detritus gets the murderer gets away from Detritus and Cuddy, and they're locked in some kind of a freezer.
To me, it reminded me of the place where Rocky Balboa works at the beginning of Rocky.
Yeah.
Which is this, cow shipping plant, and he boxes on the cows.
Yeah.
Anyway,
we discover that Detritus and all trolls, and it's such a cute art for Detritus.
It is so sweet. He starts talking super, super intellectually, and Cuddy is like, "What is wrong with you?" And he's like, I believe when trolls' heads are too warm, their brain doesn't work quite enough, and now that it's colder, my brain can work as easily as ever.
Yeah,
and
starts talking about thermodynamics and stuff.
Yeah, he becomes a genius.
I don't know how they get stuck into a freezer, I can't remember, but Cuddy and Detritus are on the trail of the killer, and as they descend deeper into the depths of Ankh-Morpork, it gets colder.
Yeah, I thought that they were following him, and they thought the murderer went into the plant, and so they did, and then the door shut behind them, and Detritus was like...
It's the pork plant.
Yeah, Detritus was like, I worked here at one point. There's no exits other than the one that we just walked through when we can't get out.
And we're shut inside.
And we're gonna die. And they only open the doors once every so often to bring the pork in and out, so...
Guess we're dead.
They're stuck.
But he saves Cuddy's life a second time by throwing him through a vent in a really high place, and Cuddy, I just imagine he's got his twin axes just screaming as he falls out this window.
Yeah.
And then Cuddy looks for people to save Detritus' life, so they resolve their tensions.
Yeah.
And it's representative of the race war being solved later on.
My favorite part is when they do come and save Detritus, he's like passed out and like dying, and there's this like grand huge equation that he's written on the wall, and it says equals, and then there's nothing.
Well, while Detritus is getting colder and colder, his brain just starts operating at optimal capacity or maximum optimacy or whatever. I don't know what the language is. What's English?
I don't know. It needs to get a little colder before I can tell you.
Yeah, that's what I need. I need just like to wrap some freezer whatever things around my head. Detritus is like coming up with a solution to the universe or something like that, and he's writing on the walls all these complex equations, and then right before he's about to solve it, he writes an equal sign, and then they save Detritus.
And when they bring him back to life, they're like, what does it mean? What does it equal? And he's like, what's equals?
Yeah, he becomes dumb again.
It's so silly.
But it's a nice little arc for detritus where it's like, okay, trolls aren't stupid. Like, there's a reason why, like, they need cold air to, like, think better. I thought that formula would come back later at the end of the story.
I thought it would too.
But it doesn't.
Maybe it will in another Discworld book.
Yeah.
I don't know.
It's just kind of a cute thing, I guess. Maybe it will come back. You never know.
Yeah. I really did enjoy the clown funeral, as I mentioned before. Terry Pratchett and Terry Pratchett alone should be the only one who can write clown funerals.
Yeah.
He did it perfectly.
Yeah,
he did. It was so silly and exactly what you would expect. My favorite line, I think, was they were interrogating someone about a clown who had been murdered. And they were like, have you heard about Beano? And the clown is like, yes, I have. That's why my pants are at half-mast. It was so silly to me. I thought it was so funny. And I could just picture the suspenders with the huge waist and it being way too low. Oh, so silly.
Yeah, his world building is so great.
How fun to get to write a clown funeral. I'm never going to get over that.
I know. It's really awesome. It's a very charming book. A little disappointing for me.
Yeah.
It introduces some ideas that are very interesting, but that don't get resolved in a very satisfying way.
Yeah.
The murder mystery is like, we found the murderer, but the antagonist isn't very interesting either. And I think it's because they don't compete directly with what the main characters are fighting for ideologically.
I think that's a need. I
think so
really
too.
think that's a need. I will say, I really did enjoy the conflict that he wrote and the action scenes, such as the moment when Vimes is passed out and then wakes up to someone trying to kill him. And the descriptors are so chaotic because someone's shooting a gun into his room, which
from a rooftop.
No one knows what a gun is. It's made up, and so he was so much chaos, so much confusion as to what was even being thrown at him. And I really liked that scene and how he approached being woken up to hearing gunshots and having your life trying to be taken.
Yeah.
I thought that was so cool.
He also makes that scene more tense because it's written in omniscient third by jumping from Vimes' perspective to Angua's perspective and other characters. So it's like...
there's a lot of jumping.
Yeah, but it keeps you interested and keeps you reading because it's like you want to watch this scene where Captain Vimes is under attack. How does that get resolved?
Yeah.
So he's just a good writer.
He is.
And a good storyteller.
It's fantastic.
I just feel like it's a bit of a swing and a miss with this one for me.
Yeah.
I would like to rewrite it.
Yeah. I think there could be some tightening here and there that could make it more seamless.
Yeah. But is this one of your favorite books?
No.
Would you recommend it?
Yeah, for sure.
Okay.
I think it's fun. Is this one of your favorite books?
No!
No!
And I'm so sad to say it because I love Terry
believe
Pratchett.
it.
Yeah.
Would you recommend it?
Yeah, of course I would. It's an enjoyable read.
It is very fun.
Give it a listen.
Give it a listen. Give it a read.
Well, thank you all for watching. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave a like. Leave a comment. What did you think about this book? Do you agree with our opinions or not?
If you've read the Discworld series, what book did you start with?
Yeah. Which one in the Discworld series is your best? Your favorite?
Which one do you hate the most?
If you haven't subscribed yet, please do so. It helps our channel out a bunch.
We release book reviews every Sunday.
And we have a very fun readathon coming up in October that we're excited to announce soon.
Oh, yeah.
So stick around for that if you want to read some spooky bucks with us. Spooky bucks?
Spooky bucks!
If you want to earn some spooky bucks, then go ahead and read the books that we're going to for this month.
Yep.
Thank you all for listening.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye. Nice.